From Olympia, an in-depth look at decisions at the state capitol and how they impact you. This is The Impact.
Hello and welcome to The Impact. I'm Mike McClanahan. Regardless of where you live in Washington, you're paying taxes for government services and programs. Some are obvious, like school districts and city or county departments. Depending on where you live, the list may also include a transportation benefit district, a regional trauma care council, or even a TV reception district. The list goes on, and there's one state agency in charge of holding all of them accountable. The Washington State Auditor's Office conducts financial audits, performance audits, and cybersecurity audits for state government, local governments, and schools. They investigate whistleblower complaints, conduct training, and produce reports. Last year, they completed more than 2,700 audits that turned up all sorts of issues. For example, finding that a city with a $1 million annual budget was missing $37,000 in cash and couldn't lock the city safe because no one knew the combination. Our guest today is Scott Frank, Director of Performance and IT Audits for the State Auditor's Office. Scott, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
First off, how would you summarize your job?
My role, I'm a director. I oversee a couple of key functions for our office. The big one is the performance audits that we conduct under a citizens initiative that was passed about a dozen years ago to go out and evaluate agencies and programs. I also oversee our IT audit function. The largest part of that is the cybersecurity audits to ensure that governments are safe and secure and try and help put up walls against hackers.
So, traditionally, maybe when people hear audit, they think IRS, they think books, finances, line by line. But what are the different types of audits? You just talked about them a bit, but how many are there?
The traditional audit that people would think of with a government audit would be a financial statement audit. That's basically auditors coming in and giving an opinion as to whether a set of financial statements are reasonably accurate and you can use them for decision making, and we conduct a ton of those audits. We also do what are called accountability audits. These are audits that compare government performance against a lot of times legal requirements, in some cases some leading practices for how they should be managing their finances and such, and again we do a lot of that work. What I'm in charge of with the performance audits, it's a little bit different. It's not so much comparing them to specific standards, but rather it's to take a look at government agencies and programs and let's see if we can find some ways to make them run better, to work better for the taxpayers. And that's really the focus of what a performance audit is.
So you're currently in the process of conducting a performance audit related to Sound Transit, for example. What's the goal?
So in that case, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the way they oversee the projects, take a look at projects, see if they have grown in scope, scale, if they've grown in cost, and try and work back and figure out why. In some cases, there can be some very legitimate reasons why projects end up being a lot bigger or more expensive than you originally set out. Sometimes that can be the result of inadequate oversight or project management practices. So we're going to kind of dig in and see if there are issues there, and if there are, we'll see if we can make some recommendations on how to make the process work better.
Vaccination is a hot topic this year with the measles outbreak in Washington and a new law to strengthen immunization requirements. Your office is studying common barriers to compliance with student immunization requirements. So what are you finding so far?
We're still in the process of the audit, but when we first started looking into this topic, we were interested in some of the exemptions that are granted. We know that there are a lot of exemptions offered in Washington school districts that would allow students to attend without the vaccinations. What we noticed as we started to get in there is that perhaps an even bigger area of concern is simply students who don't have an exemption but don't have their vaccinations either, and that's actually a larger group. So we're kind of trying to delve into that and figure out, does that mean those students don't actually have their vaccinations? And if that's the case, why not? What keeps them from getting there, and what keeps the schools from enforcing the rules on that?
Another project underway focuses on data system backup and recovery. Why is that critical?
This is just an area, it's often neglected part of security, and when you're dealing with your systems, it's sort of, you don't need those until you need them, and so oftentimes agencies or governments don't have the kind of recovery systems in place, so it's a high-risk area, and so it's something we wanted to take a look at. We've seen issues with that in other state agencies, local governments, and thought we'd take a look at some agencies here.
Last year, I believe Atlanta, among other cities, but maybe Atlanta was the biggest target. A ransomware attack locked up a lot of the city's functions and really sort of brought that city government to its knees. Is this the sort of thing that you're concerned about when you look at cybersecurity or data backup?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's one of the best ways to deal with ransomware is to have a good backup, because then if they ransom your data, then you don't have to pay them. You can simply use your backups. If you don't have a good backup, and which is often what governments find out, is that they're attacked by ransomware, and then they find out they don't have a good backup system, and then they're kind of at the mercy of those who've taken their data.
When you look at the amount of data collected by governments, whether they're local government entities, state government entities, in any possible number of different varieties, where you're talking about health information or legal information, what are some of the issues that you run into with that? And when you hear about all these data breaches each year, is this something that are you finding that most places are taking care of this information or have room for improvement?
Well, there's always room for improvement, and no system is going to be completely robust against attacks. I do think that for government entities, it is especially important that we protect the data, because unlike a private company who you choose to do business with, and therefore if they lose your information or compromise their information, that was a voluntary arrangement. A lot of times people, give their information to government because they have to, not because they've chosen to, and I think that puts an extra burden of stewardship on the part of government. So I think it's important to look into. We have a very robust cybersecurity audit function here. I think it's one of the biggest and most robust of any state audit shop in the country. It's been very successful, and the governor and the legislature both saw the value in it, and this year for the coming biennium have given us about $2.8 million to greatly expand that function.
When you go into a government entity, do you get pushback? I mean, is there a sense of resentment? On the one hand, this is a state office. There are, elected leaders. There are appointed and just state employees, as well as you may be dealing with, say, a local government where local electeds and appointed people kind of think, we're government too. Who are you to tell us how to run our business? And do you get much of that?
You do get some, and I think it's the way to think about it is that if you go into the accounting profession and you're going to work in the accounting department or be involved in the books for a government entity, you kind of expect to have a financial audit regularly. That just comes with the territory. They probably don't love it, but it's just, you just accept that. Performance audits are a little different. I mean, performance audits are generally one-offs. We don't go back to the same entity over and over again for the same topic, so that they don't always know when they might have one. We don't surprise them, but they can't really plan for them long term. They don't have this capacity to answer those questions, so it takes away from their regular job. And so that creates a sense of frustration for people, and we do as many things as we can to mitigate that, to be as professional and respectful of their time and the effort as we can. But in the end, a lot of times they'd probably rather we weren't there.
And this goes for state agencies too. I know Department of Corrections, DSHS. There have been performance audits with these entities too, correct?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And we audit most of the state agencies. We get around. We do not do the performance audits on most of the local governments. There's just way too many of them. But we end up doing performance audits at most of the state agencies. But they're still not generally on a regular cycle, and so they just have to kind of accommodate when one comes up and work with us on it.
So do you reach out to them, or do they reach out to you, or how does it work?
As far as how an audit is initiated, occasionally they reach out to us and ask for an audit. More often than not, we go through a process of identifying potential audit areas that can include things that we learn from our colleagues in the other part of the agency that are conducting the financial and the accountability audits. Sometimes that's from legislators who have ideas. Sometimes that's from legislators who pass laws that say we have to do audits. Sometimes it's ideas that our staff just simply come up with, and we kind of go through a risk analysis and figure out which ones we think would be the most valuable and pick the audits, and then we let those agencies know, when we plan to come conduct the audit.
So if you're at home watching this interview, well, what does this mean for taxpayers?
Well, hopefully, if we're doing our job, it means that they're getting more value for their tax dollars. I mean, that's really the bottom line why we do the performance audits. We're going to have government services. They're important. We want them to work well, and we hope we are doing a job as a tool to go in and help identify ways for that to work better.
There are occasionally high-profile investigations. Recently, there was a press conference involving State Auditor Pat McCarthy and some other officials related to a local government and some findings that were apparently concerning to auditors. So what are some of the high-profile incidents that, I know you've only been here a year or so, but what are some of the high-profile incidents you can think of? And then maybe what are some of the lesser-known situations that people would possibly want to know about?
Well, I think probably what I want to comment about that is I mean, that was a pretty extraordinary situation that we felt like we needed to go out and have a press conference. We do not normally go out and hold press conferences over the audits that we conduct, but in this case, the problems in that community were bad enough that we felt like we needed to go out and explain that. We do often go out and try and do the flip side, which is when we see governments that are doing a really nice job, Auditor McCarthy goes out and meets with them. We have what we call a SOS award, a stewardship award, to recognize them. And we want to make sure that we aren't just telling the bad news, but we're telling the good news and shining a light on that as well.
In terms of just what options citizens have, if someone has concerns about a project, or if they're suspicious about the goings on or how their tax dollars are being spent or the operations of a government entity, what are their options?
Probably the best way to get a hold of us is to go to our website, and on the website we have a link to our hotline, and it allows citizens to contact us. We receive a lot of tips from citizens about what they see to be waste, fraud, abuse in their local governments and state governments. We take a look at those and do a little bit of work to see if there's a legitimate concern there, and if we think there is, then we open an investigation and try to get to the bottom of what's going on.
And also dealing with whistleblower complaints, there have been some pretty high-profile incidents regarding state agencies and whistleblower complaints that led to investigations with findings. So how do those work? Is there a hotline, or how do they avoid?
Yeah, and the real distinction there, the distinction between the two is that the whistleblower is for the state employee who observe something in the course of their work, and for them to be able to communicate that to us and be protected from retaliation, but to let us know about it when we investigate. Whereas the hotline is available to all citizens; it's not just for employees. But they get us to kind of the same place where we see potential instances and we go in and investigate and figure out if there's an issue there.
And speaking of if there's an issue there, if someone's perusing the auditor's website, looking through reports, audits, investigations, what are the key words to look for? What does finding mean?
So a finding generally means that we've found something that is not up to whatever the standard should be. So we've found that their policies and procedures are inadequate. They don't have an adequate process to protect some of their assets, or they struggle to put together financial statements. In the case of performance audits, it would just be any areas that we think there are areas where there are issues and we think that improvements could be made. And so that's what the findings mean. So in the context of the financial and accountability audits, most of those audits are issued without any findings because most governments are doing a nice job with the areas that we audit. And so when you see numerous findings in a place, as with the community we were talking about, it is a bit of a cause for alarm.
And when there is a finding, or when there is reason to suspect that there may be something going on that rises to the level of maybe criminal, or at least reckless disregard for duty or something like that, what authority does the auditor's office have? What happens after the finding?
And just to be clear, generally findings are not criminal. They're usually more just like things that should be improved in order to improve the safeguarding of assets and reporting and so forth.
Like locking the city safe.
Yeah, exactly. But when we do find issues, if we think there might be something that ought to warrant further investigation besides just stating that there is an issue here, then we can turn those over to the Attorney General, a county attorney, and so forth. But we are basically the ones who gather the information, report on it, and make it available. But we don't conduct any kind of a prosecution or anything like that.
And with so many government entities, sometimes you're dealing with really a bare bones staff, small budget. Does the auditor's office work to try to help communities, local governments that really may not have the resources that, say, a large state agency has? They don't have the budget, they don't have the personnel. So is there a role to try to help them in that respect?
Yeah, there's really several things we try and do on that front. One of which is when it just comes to time to the audit, the size of the audit, the number of hours we're going to spend on the audit, and therefore the cost of the audit to the community is very much going to scale given the size of the government. So the very small government entities have smaller and less expensive audits. The larger, more complex the entity, the more expensive the audit. So that's one of the things we do to help. For the really small ones, we also offer, if under certain conditions, where we can just sort of do a desk audit, where we don't even have to send auditors out into the field. They turn in their information, we take a look at it, and make sure that it's all in order, and that's a relatively inexpensive for them. But probably more importantly, we have a couple of groups that proactively go out and work with locals. One group that works with them on their accounting to really help them do a better job, be more prepared for an audit, keep their books in better order. And then we also have a group that's called our Center for Government Innovation, whose job is to go out and help locals just run things better, to give them innovative ideas on how to be a more effective government so that they don't necessarily have to wait for an audit to come and tell them what they're not doing, that they can help them in advance.
Very briefly, last question with about 10 seconds. Who audits you?
Who audits us? That's a frequent question. We undergo what's called a peer review once every 3 years, and we do this to the National State Auditors Association, and a group of fellow state auditors come in and take a look at our processes and make sure that we are following our rules.
Well, we're out of time, but thank you very much. This has been informative. Scott, Frank, thank you for your insight.